Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Sinsalon Presentations. We are here with Sandy Way today, and Massimo is gonna introduce him.
Okay, well, it's an honor and pleasure to introduce Sandy Way. My introduction can be very, very short, could be very, very short, in the sense that, no, he is the only scholar I know who is 100% cognitive science, 100% computer science, and 100% linguistics, okay, syntax. He was working closely with Noam Chomsky before Chomsky had a stroke. Almost every day they were working together.
Well, not every day, but
almost every day. Well, so there is this book, Merge and the Strong Minimalist Thesis, is the group around Noam. Noam is one of the authors. He is one of the authors. Other distinguished linguists are there. So trained computer scientist, PhD, MIT, artificial intelligence lab. I graded linguistic classes, when I was there. NEC research, Princeton, New Jersey. I'm actually British. I didn't know that. Actually British.
Yeah,
Grew up in England, studied electrical engineering at Imperial College, none less than Imperial College, University of London, then got a degree in computing science before moving to the USA for graduate school. Now, he is an avid cyclist, a very important avid cyclist. When he visited here some years ago, gave the job talk, he was very disappointed because, the road up to Mount Lemmon was blocked. He can cycle all the way up to Mount Lemmon. That's extraordinary. And then I finished with I don't know if you still have this fantastic Alfa Romeo, the red Alfa Romeo, you still have it?
Yeah, it's not working, but it's
not working. Fantastic red Alfa Romeo two-seater, fantastic car. Okay, that's all I have to say. Go ahead.
Well, I hope people online can also hear me. Everybody hear me? Good. All right, and well, let's begin. So I'm going to talk about Strong Minimalist Thesis and SMT for short. And I want to draw your attention to two of these QR codes. Unfortunately, this QR code is blocked. I don't know if I can.
I think you can.
Move that guy.
Yeah.
How do I get that guy out of the way?
You change the style so that it's just like, instead of gallery view, just like speaker view or something.
Single.
Let's see.
Stop the share for a second.
Stop the share. Let's stop the share.
Okay.
Hang on. This one.
Thank you for giving you here to. So that's be just one little block out here.
No, share again.
Oh, it's working?
People on
Is
Zoom.
this sharing? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
Okay.
share.
Okay. I must
No.
We're done there?
seeing it here.
not share. Working?
oh, no.
Now it is.
Let me get rid of it.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, but there's supposed to be a QR code on this side, and you can get the slides.
I can share it with you all later.
But if you don't, if you can get this one too. One problem with some of Noam's theories is that a lot of abbreviations, and if you're not familiar with them, you kind of get lost. So these are actually in the slides, but if you go to the one on the left, bottom left, if you're looking at it, then you can get one-page cheat sheet of the abbreviations I use, okay? And that Noam uses, so I recommend that one. just in case, as I go through, you're wondering, what does SMT stand for? Okay, it's on the title, but, okay. So let's proceed then. There's things I won't talk about today, because this is just a 1 hour kind of thing, and also because I've got a lot more to say. And there is a generative linguistics colloquium that I'm going to be giving on October 10th, and that's also going to be on Zoom. And that's going to talk about generative linguistics and generative AI. And it does have a connection with this talk in a sense that, those are details on the right side, partially obscured. But we're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about how AI started. And we're going to talk about how AI got to where it is today. And we'll talk about some of the examples that Chomsky uses. And we'll talk about those in relation to AI. And this is from Chomsky 2021. We're also going to talk about how these large language models deal with those things by taking a peek under the hood of the large language models. So I've got lots of explorations of those things that I'll talk about when we talk about the relation between generative linguistics and generative AI. Okay. And for SLAT students, it's a longer version of that talk on October 31st in the Pro Summit. Okay. One thing I won't talk about is my recent work on form set. And you're wondering, well, there's merge, right? There's only merge. No, there's also form set. And to understand form set, I would need to take some time to explain it. So I have a recent paper that came out. But I will mention form set in the context of design principles. The word principles here is missing from that part. And there's a paper you can find on my website. My website is sandyway.arizona.edu. Everything is on there. And if you like, you can read it. Nothing I won't talk about is a project I have, which is called the SMT parser. This is based on the same principles that we talked about today. And it's a computation model parsing. So it's a computer program. And it runs these examples by parsing. If you know linguistic theory, we talk about generative. We don't usually talk about perception. But I have a parser based on it. Then that's sort of interesting details, but I can't talk about that because we don't have time. But here's an example from the GK Chomsky 21 paper. John arrived and met Bill, and it involves not just merge, but it also involves form set. So Chomsky has this notation that I won't explain here, where things are sort of built in this fashion. The computer program also builds the same thing in the same fashion, and also defines a parse. Okay, it can do this by parsing the sentence or by generating them. We can do either way, and you can imagine there are lots of interesting research issues when that happens. One of them is, how do you parse efficiently if you only got merge? When computer science, we study lots of parsing algorithms. A lot of them have been invented for artificial languages, and we know how to parse very efficiently for those things. But we don't have those grammars anymore, phrase structure grammars and other stuff. So those are banned, okay? If you don't use those, can we still parse? Surprisingly, the answer is yes. And we actually parse fairly efficiently, but I won't be able to talk about that. The other real issue, I think, which is important for today's talk also, is we need to know how externalization works. As you can see, there's a distinction between core language and which is language of thought, and what happens when we have to externalize for a particular language. Languages vary. They vary systematically in terms of various parameters. So externalization is an important question. So how do we learn and encode word order variation is a very important topic, because merge does not encode the linear order into the core iLanguage system. So for example, if you're a linguist, you might recognize these trees. So there's a paper by Pearson in 2000, which talks about two kinds of languages. There's the direct languages, and I think the inverse languages. One uses roll-up to get the word order, and one uses head movement to get the order. Now both are banned in the latest SMT theory. So it's a very interesting problem. How do we kind of simulate getting the word orders and only the right word orders? I think Dave Medeiros has a talk about those things on Friday. Encourage you guys to attend that too. And the other thing is, look at all the different movements we have. There are 6 movements in each case to get to do something called OS. That's on the abbreviation list, that's object shift. Okay? If you want to do this, do you really want to do 6 movements to do that? So that's something we can re-examine. But again, as I said, I'm not going to be talking about this because that's kind of technical. It will take some time. Okay, so word order variation. There's also some parts of the theory that Noam talks about that I won't be able to talk about today because it's just not enough time. One of those is called M gaps. And so if you have data items that sometimes not pronounced, the human being recovers them very well. And that becomes a problem for perception because they're not pronounced, they're not in the signal. So how do we deal with things like that? That's an interesting question. Another thing I won't be talking about is in A-bar segregation, which is very, very important for Noam. So if you're a linguist, you know about things like improper movement. If you have examples like improper movement, you know that the A-bar system cannot feed back into the A system. Okay. And Noam has particular technology for that, known as the box theory. But that's going to be a bit too involved for this talk, so we'll not go there. But the parser implements all this stuff. Okay. If you want to look at my examples and parsers derivations, again, go to my website. There is a directory called SMT parser, and you can see lots and lots of derivations. And I must acknowledge a graduate student, UA linguistic graduate student. He's a native Spanish speaker, and we've been trying to put in Spanish examples. And I thought this would be really easy because it isn't Spanish just like English. No, it's not. So there's a lot to do with externalization, word order, and so this is a collaboration with Hilton. I think he's actually on the he's on Zoom, and this is with University of Puerto Rico. Okay, so those are things I won't talk about. Okay, so what I will talk about today, what I really want to get across to people in a limited time is why is the theory this way? What is the true motivation for why you can't have certain operations and why you can have certain operations? And part of the motivation is because of recent human evolution. The idea that modern humans recently arrived on the planet and there's a particular change. And that change, therefore, has implications. The other thing that I want to talk about, that's also in that book that Massimo mentioned, is I believe our brains are actually the bottleneck. Our brains, wonderful though they may be, really slow. Okay, if it's slow, operations have to be very simple, have to be very efficient. Okay, and we can tell this by looking at our senses. Our senses are excellent. Our brain just can't cope with our senses. I'll show an example in a bit. So we have to establish some terminology. So the idea that the faculty of language, this is biology, it's what you have in your brain, is an organ, a cognitive organ. Okay, and that this is called the biolinguist perspective. And 1974, that's Massimo's coined the term.
Yes.
Okay. So Massimo's the guy who introduced me. The theory of the language faculty is called UG, okay? And that's universal grammar. And the reason why it's called universal grammar is very simple. Whatever we have, we can acquire and use language, all kinds of human language, okay? So what we have there is, some genetic endowment that allows us to do that. So that grammar, the theory of that, is called universal grammar. The design also must be very, very simple. And I'll introduce the Miracle Creed to you. That's one of the titles of one of Noam's more recent papers.
Yes.
And we'll talk about why he thinks that's so important. The other thing that you might hear about is the third factor. You're thinking, first of all, what are the first and second factors? Okay. First factors are genetic endowment, what I talked about, respect to universal grammar. The second factor is experience, okay, we learn language, okay, exposure, primary linguistic data, that's important. The third factor is what's new. And what's new about the third factor is that whatever constraints there are on biological systems, our brain, language processing part, the so-called functional organ, must obey those same constraints. So I just told you earlier, the brain is really slow. Okay, and that creates a real pressure on the system to be really, really simple. Okay, so that's one thing. I'm also going to talk about things like workspace. Don't worry about that, we'll get to it. That's basically the scratch pad. And we have a scratch pad where all the merge operations are occurring, and there's only that scratch pad. We'll talk about merge defined with respect to workspaces. Told you it's full of jargon, so WS means workspace. We'll talk also about Markovian assumption. Basically, for us, that's going to mean no access to computational history. And I'll explain exactly technically what that means when it comes to merge in a bit. We want to talk about a bit about the difference between a third factor design principle and a constraint. Okay, so you can think of a constraint as something applying when we do the merge. We build some structure, and if you like, it's a bit like we say this structure is good, this other structure is not so good, so we'll rule out that structure. That's a constraint. A design principle can look like a constraint, but it's not. It's part of what nature does to limit the possible operations to begin with. So we don't check it at runtime. You don't suddenly merge something and then say, oh, it violates this design constraint. No, it designed it, baked in is the idea. Okay. And I think some people get confused about those two things. Another thing I'll talk about is minimal search. In fact, when it comes to search, there's only minimal search. That's the simplest way. I'll talk also about the duality of semantics. There's a division of labor between two forms of merge. One is called internal merge, one's called external merge, which I'll define in a moment. And it's kind of an axiom in the system that they have to, one gets to do one job, one gets to do some other job. Okay. I also mentioned a little bit about copy repetition problems. So you have two identical inscriptions in the same structure. Are they copies of each other, or are they independent repetitions? Okay, that's also something I'll use there. There's much, much more, but I think I will run out of time, maybe even before I get there. Okay, so that's the plan. So let's talk about the human evolution part. So the idea is very simple. If you look back at the fossil record, there's a period of hominid evolution where you don't get, in the fossil record, lots of symbolic verbs, and then there's an explosion. Okay, there's lots of symbolic verbs, and it seems to coincide with the appearance of modern human beings about 200, 300,000 years ago. So TYA is one of those things, an abbreviation, 1,000 years ago. Okay. The actual date is not that significant, but the important thing to realize that in terms of evolution of organisms, that's a very, very short time. If it's a short time, we didn't have much time to evolve language. In fact, as Noam says, there is no language evolution. Okay, it appeared, and we haven't had time to evolve it. Yeah, so one guy who talks about this a lot is a guy called Ian Patterson, and he has a really nice entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica that talks about this. Okay, so it says, until the emergence of behaviorally modern Homo sapiens, in general, technological innovation is sporadic and rare. So you can go 100,000 years without something big change in the use of tools. Okay, and he said, well, we do know that once they arrived here, especially from the archaeological evidence in Europe, we will see suddenly where there was nothing, a lot of stuff came out. Okay. And what's really nice about it, and I really wish I could move this, okay, is that this is regularly updated. So every time they make a new archaeological discovery, that page inside the Britannica gets updated. And the last update I saw was August 29th, 2025. So somehow this thing gets refreshed, and every new discovery somehow makes it into that update, and may affect the timeline and so on. So forth. But that's the basic idea. And other people have noted we are tool builders. Okay, we can fashion tools that amplify our inherent abilities that we have to spectacular magnitudes. I mean, especially with respect to locomotion, computation, okay, and medicine, many other fields. We are unique in that respect, okay? So let's talk a little bit about that third factor. For the third factor, I'm going to restrict myself to computation efficiency for the purposes of this talk, but it could involve more, okay? So I claim our brain is slow. And I think one way you can see this is there's a huge sensor-brain mismatch, despite the fact that the wetware is the same, okay? We're made of the same stuff. But our sensors somehow are really good, and our brain can't take all the information. So the slow brain limits what kind of sensory input can be analyzed. And what's really interesting, and I'm not sure I can't move that over here. Does anyone know how to move the thing to the right side?
On his
Can you not grab it?
computer, can you try to do that?
Stop sharing.
Because I got lots of stuff in there. Right edge. Everything on mine is on the right edge. I seem to be right edged. Okay, I'll continue talking, and I know what's on the right, so I'll just say it. Really, what's very interesting is the fact that until the mid-20th century, scientists believed that the brain was electrical. Couldn't possibly be chemical, right? Chemical is so slow. But it took until the mid-20th century before they finally proved the human brain inside is actually chemical, okay? And there's a really good book that I recommend you read called The Wars, Soups, and Sparks. So it talks about these 19th century scientists, you know, some of them saying, no, it's electrical. And the other guy said, no, there's some chemical part to it. And eventually, you know, microscopes got good enough that we could see that the neurons are not connected directly. I don't know if you guys can see, there are neurotransmitters in there. And that's a chemical signal. And the fastest, it's only a tiny gap, like 20, 40 nanometers, okay? Really tiny. But that gap means everything, because that means it's slow. The fastest neurotransmitters are around a millisecond. I mean, compared to electrical signals, that's a lifetime, okay? So if neural communication is involved in language, you just can't process it quick, okay? And sorry, there's you can't read that, but it says neurotransmitters. What's interesting about evolution is that evolution repurposes things. So neurotransmitters predated the invention of neurons. So, you know, nature co-opts what it has and to work with. One very interesting, I've got lots of these cases, but one really interesting one is, can we see a single photon, right? You have been being bombarded with photons from the screen, from outside, reflections everywhere. But actually, our eyes are so sensitive that under the right conditions, you can actually see a single photon. That wasn't known until recently. So most people think, like Gibbs did in 1996, that, wait a minute, there's too much information. There must be neural filtering that prevents a single photon from reaching the brain. You've got to accumulate enough of them in order to pass the signal. And people used to believe, you know, you've got to have at least 5 to 9 photons within a certain amount of time before they'll pass on the information. But we know now that's not true, okay? So in 2016, it's not 1942. We can fire a single photon at you. In 1942, we couldn't do that, okay? And they discovered, man, people can really detect a single photon above chance. Not only that, there's even a single photon priming effect. So you fire a single photon at you, up to 3.5 seconds, and as it peaks at 3.5 seconds, we'll fire another photon at you, you're more likely to see it, okay? So that's amazing from the physics standpoint. So, but do we need this sensitivity? Do we need single photon sensitivity? And the answer is no, okay? Many of our senses are like that. They are extremely sensitive, and our brain just can't handle that flood of information, okay? So as Noam says, we throw out almost everything in the signal. Okay, so let's talk a bit more. Berwick and Chomsky have a book, and it's called Why Only Us, okay? And we have different systems. So one system is the vocal learning production aspect. of externalization, and that is not human specific. That's an ancient system, okay, that predates language, according to the theory. However, language is an authentic species property, according to Noam, and that's where we get thought, okay? Thought as modern humans have it, okay? So we've got two systems. Suddenly one appears, and we have an ancient system which we have to use. We didn't have time to develop another system. So we somehow have to interface between the two, and that's called externalization. There's got to be some glue, some middleware between the two systems, okay? Anyway, Noam says our closest relatives, otherwise intelligent apes, cannot begin to grasp the most elementary rudiments of language, even with intensive training. Okay, they have a similar hardware to us, but something's missing. And so the claim is that language is the special thing that they're missing. And that arrived only with modern human beings. So Noam then says, well, basically then language should be really simple. And that's where merge is going to come in. Merge is going to be the simplest operation that can exist, mathematically speaking, that will give us basically structure. Okay, that's the idea. That's where we stop. And he said, well, it's the result of a small change. And that small change happened recently because of the arrival of modern humans. It's some small rewiring of the brain and has not changed since, meaning there's been no further evolution of language. Okay, you see conferences saying evolution language, as Noam says. I remember him talking at one of those conferences. Says, I don't know what you mean by evolution language, but there is none. Okay. That's what he means. Okay, if we actually look at ourselves and look at other hominins, there's actually very little difference. So if we look at just coding as opposed to non-coding genes, okay, and then coding genes only 1.5, less than 2% the human genome. Most of it is so-called junk, non-coding genes. If you look at the coding part, there are about 20,000 proteins where we differ from our nearest relatives, okay? And we diverge, we know we diverged from them about 600,000 years ago. Pretty long time from the point of view of human species. But in that time, if they didn't have language, language, this language of thought, but we do, it must have happened after that separation. And what's really interesting is that they found 14,000 regions where those archaic humans are different from us. So the DNA pattern is a little bit different. And they found out of 14,000, only 407 of them drove differential expression, in the genes. So they realized differently. So if there is a so-called language gene or language genes, it's in those 407, okay? If the theory is right, okay? And that's, there's lots of publications on this based on the separation. Okay, so I said we have suddenly this new functionality, but I also said nature sort of optimizes. And part of SMT says language, nature finds the best way to deal with all this. Okay, you got a node system, pronunciation, where we pronounce things, we have, we do perception, and we have this new functionality, so-called universal grammar, language. Okay, so there's a disruptive event that gave us language. That small change that Chomsky talks about. And there's the next phase is called reconstruction. Even if you have the functionality, you've got to use it. And you can only use it when you put together a new system, okay? A new system is gonna interface between the newer node, okay? That's what's gonna happen. That's called reconstruction. There's a third stage, which Noam says we haven't got to, it's called winnowing, okay? That's the literature, okay. I want to just provide a brief example from the eye. So notice these two eyes are pretty similar. One is an octopus and one is a human, okay? Nature's reinvented eyes many, many times. Okay, we know from genetic record, maybe 50 times, okay, at least that we know of. These two eyes are very similar in that they are camera-based. There's a lens, there's muscles, okay, to do focusing, there's a retina, sensors, but our wiring is a little bit different. we have a so-called blind spot. The octopuses have a better system where the wiring is behind the sensors. That's much more sensible from the point of view of design. And they don't have a blind spot, okay? Otherwise, very similar eyes. But we know our last common ancestor from genetic study is, of the order of 750,000 years ago, okay? So after that split, we evolved this called convergent evolution. We both managed to evolve almost the same plan for eyes, okay? But we have a blind spot, which we work around. You don't see a blind spot, right? The eye moves and fills in all that detail, gets rid of it. I'm not going to talk about the timelines for where we get the human brain, but 100 million years, 750, did I say 1,000? I meant million, okay? 750 million years ago is our last common ancestor. 100 million years ago, we lost good eyesight. We had tetrachromatic vision, but now we're trichromatic, right? We're three kinds of cones, okay? And the brain didn't really emerge in our terms until a few million years ago, okay? So why am I telling you this? Well, do you know the octopus is supposed to be colorblind? Instead of having three kinds being able to see color, they only have one kind of photoreceptor. Sorry, it says only one kind of photoreceptor. But we know they employ color. You know why? They camouflage themselves to the environment. And they signal each other using multicolor displays that we're not sure what they mean. Okay? So if they can't see color, how can they see color, right? With just one kind of sensor. Nature does a very smart job of doing what it can with just what you can get color from just having one kind of photoreceptor. You know how? It's a lens. Lenses are imperfect, right? And if you look through a lens sideways, you get a prismatic effect. And people discovered that's how they get color. And that's how they're able to interpret color using one sensor. Yeah.
There's actually a much better story about single photoreceptor color vision in terms of timing. We can talk about it later.
Oh, okay, thank you. You told to me about it. Okay. So anyway, example of convergent evolution and nature doing the best it can. All right. So structures of eye language. Now we're going to talk about the simplest operation for which we can generate eye language structures. And so evolution impossibility, recent humans, we need a simple mechanism. Whatever emerged, not yet really fully developed, just a simple thing. I say computational efficiency is also necessary because of the slow brain. And again, we can't have really complicated operations. And the miracle creed, which I'll explain in the next slide, says that not only we expect those things, we should have them because that's the way the universe is explained. Okay. And that sounds crazy, but we'll talk about it in a moment. Okay. What's clear and what people should be careful about is what's not part of this system. Okay. What's not part of core eye language. So language variation, parameterization, things like word order, that's not part of this system, according to this theory. So acquisition is not part of the system. This system has no parameters. There's no learning going on in the system. So anything about, whether something expresses a surface subject or not, different languages, that's in a different system. So that must be in the other system, the glue between the ancient system and this newfound functionality in the process called externalization, which we have to deal with when we build parsers and stuff like that, but we won't deal with it in this lecture here. So there's going to be a divide between eye language, this internal form, and what's expressed in any given particular language, and that we call e-language, okay? And so there are various consequences of that, including the fact that you could have a well-formed thought that you don't externalize, okay? That's not directly externalizable. You have to find some other way to externalize it. Okay? And Noam has lots of examples of those cases. The strong form of the minimalist thesis is that all linguistic phenomena that fall within core eye language can be accounted for. That's the hope, okay? Not that all language can be accounted for. If some language needs to be accounted for things outside core I language. Okay. And some people, think this is too strong a position, but you have to realize he's talking about core properties. Okay, let's talk about miracle creed. This is Albert Einstein in around 1950. And in 1950, he wrote an article for Scientific American. And Scientific American is not his usual publications, okay? He usually publishes math, okay? But he wrote a really nice thing trying to explain gravity, okay? And in that, he talked about philosophy. One of the things he talked about philosophy, he says the metaphysicist believes that not all that's logically simple is embodied in experienced reality. So logically simple is also the real for the metaphysicist, but not the tamed metaphysicist. Okay, so the tamed metaphysicist believes that the totality of all sensory experience can be comprehended on the basis of a conceptual system built on premises of great simplicity. And Chomsky says, look, language is also one of those things, not just gravity. Language must be explained by the system. Einstein says the skeptic will say this is a miracle creed, admittedly so, but it's a miracle creed that's been borne out to an amazing extent by the development of science. And Einstein goes on to talk about atoms, he goes on to talk about gravity, he goes on to talk about simpler systems. Not necessarily simpler in the terms of my ability to understand his theories, but simpler in the sense that there were fewer equations required in order to describe nature, okay? So I recommend people read that, it's online. All right, and the way that computer science is going, AI is going, is the opposite direction. So people may know about large language models. GPT-4 has 1.7 trillion parameters. Okay, that's an awful lot of parameters, not the simple equations. And that's, something I'll talk about in the linguistic colloquium. Okay, so let's talk about merge now. In fact, merge is going to be really simple. So the basic property of language that Noam talks about, the core properties, is structural dependence. So you have phrases and heads and phrases, and they bear relation to each other. We compute relations based on the fact they're in structure, okay, not linear order. In fact, linear order is a simpler system than building structure. And building structure can be very hard, as computational linguists know. You feed something, a sentence through a parser, it doesn't always get the right parse. Building structure is not easy, okay? But we adopt it. So the Strong Minimalist Thesis says, what's the simplest mechanism that results in building some structure? And mathematically, and let's call this mathematical merge, with respect to Marcoli, Chomsky, and Berwick, the new MIT Press book that just came out, mathematical merge is very simple. You've got two items, X and Y, so we're going to call it binary operation, and you just create a set, okay? You can't have anything simpler than this, mathematically speaking. And notice no order is encoded. So if you need to do order, it's a different system. It's a system of sort of linearizing that set, okay? That's in externalization.
Marcoli has two L's.
Oh, I'm sorry?
Marcoli is
has
two L's. Yes.
Sorry, my fault. Okay. Next thing that's very important is this can recurse. So merge must be able to feed merge. So we've got to merge two things, put in a workspace. Merge two other things, put in a workspace. Then we take two things from the workspace and merge them. That's the idea why we have a workspace, okay? And there's certain constraints on that workspace, which I may not have time to go into, okay? Right. And that's kind of crucial. So eventually you can build some structure, and this is built by my parser. This is, well, a train has arrived or something like that. And people are more used to having a tree that you can't see because it's hidden behind that thing, okay? But we can build structures, and those are examples of so-called I-language structures. People talk about non-recursive. So the core merge, conjoin you may have heard of, where you just merge once. You don't recurse. I don't think of those as merge. To be mathematically, a mathematical operation, it's got to be able to feed itself, okay? And you're not allowed any embellishments to this system. Anything you propose will be banned, and lots of people propose things and they get banned, okay? nature makes merge available for cognition. So not just language could use merge, other things could use merge. So there's a little experiment saying, well, what else can use merge? One thing is, let's say numbers, be able to have ordinal numbers, be able to have a sequence, natural numbers would be merged. Imagine you have a lexicon, a dictionary that has just one head. So we've got one head, then I have a workspace, I put in a workspace, and just for convenience, let's suppose my workspace has these sets, because I'm going to work with sets. So what does merge do? Merge says I've got to select two items. So I've got to select the only item in the workspace and part of that item, the subterm of X. So imagine I select X is this item. I want to select a subterm of X, the other item. Then, as I said, we create XY. So get this item, put that item back in the workspace. Now our workspace is workspace prime. Okay? That's the state of the workspace after we've done one merge. Let's do another merge. So when we do another merge, we get workspace double prime. And actually, the three ways you can go depending on the subterm. Okay? Subterm means like dominance, part of a structure. And once you start building structures, part of a structure can mean various items inside the structure. Okay. And we're going to call this internal merge, partly hidden. And that's the simplest possible definition of merge. This is core. Okay. External merge is not core. Internal merge is the simplest thing, and core we're going to know. All right. So how does the computation go? It goes something like this. Okay. So these are all the cases, starting from exactly one item in a lexicon and merging things. And if you simulate on a computer like I do, the tree just grows like this. But suppose I just look at the left side. I restrict my computation just the left side. Then you'll notice there's a one-to-one correspondence with the natural numbers. And so therefore, I can define addition using internal merge. And here's a recursive definition of addition using internal merge. And here's an example which you can't see behind that. Behind that, it says 2 plus 3. And I show you how I can use internal merge to compute 5. Okay. Sorry about that. I wish I knew the couldn't move that thing. All right. So this is important. For I language, lexicon does not just contain one head. We're going to assume there are multiple possible heads. And IM has been established to be basic. Term of is the simplest possible relation you can have given IM. So I'm going to use this diagram. Okay. So you have a workspace item X. And then you have X has some term Y. And these are the two inputs of binary merge. And we compute XY. Okay. I want you to bear that in mind because that's going to have real repercussions in a bit. We're also going to need things like data configurations. Okay. If you're a linguist, you know that things like verbs have arguments, external arguments, internal arguments. You have agents, you have patients, you have all those things. We're going to assume there are a certain set of data configurations. Okay. And here, if you're a linguist, you realize that little v is a head that belongs to X. R is also a head that belongs to X. And EA and IA, external argument, internal argument, could be complex objects built by merge, or they could be heads. Okay. These things are readable by interpretation. So after you build a syntactic, an I language structure, you send it for interpretation. So therefore, all these things, interpretation knows which of these guys belong to, which particular data role. Okay, we have to take that as a given. So there are configurations that interpretation can read, and merge knows how to build them. That's very important. Merge doesn't just randomly merge things. It knows and focuses on building those things. And Chomsky says, basically, merge is just a thought-generating system. Okay, external merge is what we're going to need in order to build these. An external merge therefore brings a sister-of relation. So the sister-of relation is not basic. It comes in with external merge because you've got two things in the workspace and you're going to make them sisters. Okay, sister-of relation. All right, and so what I did there was X has term now becomes workspace item Y, both from things. That's external merge. Okay. So if we have this system, let me skip that part about whether X and Y have to be the same. Okay, so external merge is more complex than internal merge, and we would prefer internal merge, but it is required by faculty of language because we need to construct the code. Okay, that's the position that NOM has taken the last 5 years or so, at least the last 5 years or so. So we've got two systems now. One, the two inputs come from X and a term Y. Okay, and we call that internal merge. The other system, we're going to talk external merge, X and Y, both coming separately. Those are the only two varieties of merge that we're going to have. Okay. Now I want to illustrate one very simple property. Okay, and that suppose I have this structure X, and inside I have XY. Okay, is the overlap between internal merge and external merge? In fact, there is. This is called the copy repetition problem. Okay, and I'll explain that in a moment. So imagine I have a workspace that has two elements, just X and Y. So I could build workspace prime by merging those two guys together. And then I can build workspace double prime, this flash briefly, that by internal merge, right? Can produce that guy. But I can also build this from X, Y, X in my workspace. I can external merge that and then run external merge one more time. And since I'm not allowed to annotate these things with indices or traces, no tampering condition, I don't know which one is built. So I have to be able to determine what's a copy and what's a repetition. The answer to this puzzle is very simple. It's duality. Okay, so
That's 5 minutes.
okay, I'll do it quickly. External merge builds the theta configurations. IM builds this course. So when the mathematical merge is applied to language, there is no problem there, assuming we assume duality. Okay, let me go quicker. Okay, so duality is this language-specific condition. By language-specific condition, we mean language organ-specific condition. Merge can be used by other cognitive systems, but that's the point. Another thing that we'll talk about in a moment, if I got a few more minutes, is that minimal search is also another language-specific condition. And not only that, those are conditions that are baked in by design. So remember I said design principle versus constraint. You can't say I'm going to merge things in a different way and then rule it out by the design principle. It's already baked in. You're not going to get the other structures. Okay. That's the idea. There's something called, people know, our linguists, something like extension condition, which means root only. And sorry about that, but imagine I have X over there, and I have a Y, and I have a root up top, and I want to merge X and Y, but I don't want to put Y, which you can't see, into X at the root. I want to put it somewhere in the middle, okay? So I need a Z, the point at which I need to insert that thing, all right? So many of these other things are all banned because we have something called an extension condition. But actually, you don't need the extension condition, okay? And again, I have a problem here. Imagine that was the same diagram. There are two items here being put as input to our operation. Well, I need to specify Z, right? Because I want to put it in somewhere else in the middle. So get Z is a term of Y, and we have three inputs. Three inputs is not allowed. It's a binary operation. You can't have it. Anytime you need to specify anything else, that's beyond. Okay. Non-tampering condition is some linguists know about. When we turn something into a trace, that's not permitted. It's the simplest possible merge operation. You don't get to take something, tweak it, and then merge it, or tweak it after you merge it. Okay, you don't allow that. Inclusiveness too. So I can't gamma mark, I can't co-index anything during derivation. All that is gone. And so many explanations need to be rethought. Okay. And you're not allowed to circumvent these principles. I read a paper recently where someone says, haha, because you can't do this, I'll just put heads into the workspace already pre-indexed. So now I know they belong. Okay, sorry, no circumvention of this. All right, so merge basically builds these thought expressions and the propositional domain, and then it transitions to what's known as the closal domain, and it adds other heads in order to flesh that out. I won't be able to go into details of that. And then once we have everything, we'll have language particular spell out and externalization. Oops. Okay. Don't I have 10 minutes?
We have 10, but for discussion, we need, I mean,
Can we do discussion? If we,
it depends
Right,
on
10.
people, so, okay, it's,
Can I
but
go?
the majority says you go.
Go,
I just keep going, okay?
go.
Just plain merge, right? So no feature movement, no inheritance, none of that stuff. No extra memory device for storing relations while we're merging. Doesn't happen. You got to wait till interpretation and then add interpretation. You can interpret the structure. Okay. No workspace history. That's the Markovian assumption, which I mentioned just now. Imagine we have a sequence of workspaces. We started off in workspace 0, and we go up to the workspace behind this thing. Okay. And now I have my operation. My operation can't have a foot in today's workspace and several workspaces back. I can't reach back in time and grab a structure that was available in an earlier workspace. That's the idea behind the Markovian assumption here. Everything's going to happen in the workspace we have now. Okay, no history. More complex forms emerge. Pretty useful. Some people use them for parasitic gaps, other kinds of phenomena, but they're also out. And they're also out for the same reason we had before. So imagine I have X, Y, and Z. And I decided to merge Y into both X and Z. That's parallel merge. Okay. And we get the structure which partially hidden there. That's out. And also, or if I have this structure XY and I have Z, and decide to sideways merge Y into Z, I'll get another structure which is also out. The reason why it's out could be for several reasons. One thing, it could violate minimal search, and I think that's Chomsky's position. My position is very simple. If you draw that diagram, you're going to have to specify a third thing. Specify a third thing is no longer binary. So anytime your operation needs 3 pieces of information, you're done. No, you're not allowed. Okay, banned. Minimal yield, which I won't have time to talk about, is a design principle. So it's not like you merge things and then decide whether minimal yield applies. Okay, minimal yield is also baked in. What is minimal yield about? It's about, I didn't have it here. It's about how the workspace grows. Okay, you don't want a workspace to grow too fast because then the combinatorial possibilities exceed what we can process. Okay. All right, structural relations. So Chomsky gives lots of examples. Notice I haven't given a simple example in this talk yet. So an adverb must find a verb to modify. And Chomsky has carefully the mechanic will fix the car and packed his tools, and his tools is hidden behind there. Okay. And he said, well, you can't use the simplest computation, which is just to scoot on down and find the nearest verb. You've got to build your structure and then find the closest verb. Okay, building structure said is kind of hard. Okay. Other things are to do with agree. So if you have inflection has 5 features, and 5 features must find the closest relevant, data relevant item. And for transitives, that'll be the external argument, because in that structure, first thing you'll see will be the external argument. If you're unaccusative, you're going to find the internal argument. You won't find the internal argument in the case of transitive because you'll find the external argument first. That's the idea behind search. Okay. Merge itself also must obey minimal search according to norm. Okay. And here's what the find operation looks like. Remember, internal merge brought us a term of relation. Okay. External merge brought us a sister of relation. Suppose you don't have anything other than that. So C command is basically sister plus term of. Okay. You combine those two together. I won't talk about faces, but it's got to be face local. And I won't talk about workspace partitioning because I don't have time. Okay. And again, that's all you have for finding things. So search must use this operation, because there's no other operation available. Anything embellished on this will be banned, because you will need more information. All right, so search is to look for something, okay? So in structure, that'll be C command. You get that for free, because we get the other two already. In workspace, for free, you get a member of the workspace. We don't get anything more than that, so I can't look inside. So external merge has got to obey minimal search, because I can't go inside one item in the workspace, pick a subpart out, go into another item, pick another subpart out, and merge those two guys to put in the workspace, because that would be more than one piece of information. Okay, so minimal search also says the first thing you find, you have to stop. That's third factor, efficiency. So, for example, how do we know whether I pick A or B? The answer is very simple. You never get to see B. First thing you see, you got to stop right there. You don't even get to compare. And minimal yield, it should not explode the workspace. And this contrast is with the fundamental computer science operational sorting. Sorting is not permitted, okay? Sorting is about finding the optimal thing. Sorting requires comparisons, all sorts of comparison sorts. Well, most sorts of comparison sorts. That means you have to compare candidates. If you compare candidates, I have to generate multiple candidates. But you're not allowed to, because search says you only can find one thing. So you never get to compare. Banned. No optimality theoretic accounts are part of the system. Okay? They can't be formulated. All right. Chomsky said, email to me, right now I don't see any reason why any operation should be exempt from minimal search. If so, minimal search can include structure identity checking, which is its basic intuitive content. Okay. Form set I won't go into now because I'm out of time, but there's not just merge. There's also form set, and Chomsky says we need them because of unbounding structure sequences, and I refer you to Chomsky 2021 for lots of examples. There are lots of other examples. My paper is all about these things. Okay. And form set, we have to assume it's just like merge, it's generally available combination. And what condition, design principle must that obey? Simply, if you are in a form set thing, everything is in parallel. So everything must be treated as if they were one. Okay. So everything must be similar in some coherent fashion. And Chomsky suggests plus or minus substantive, plus or minus predicative will be the properties that are easy to compute and can appear during merge time. Okay, so that, and also for interpretation, what's interpretation of something built with form set? They must be parallel. Okay, so I won't talk too much about that. There's lots of interesting cases. If we do form set with two objects, that's the same thing as merge. No, it's not, because the conditions are different. And n equals 1 is not available, but we use that for arithmetic earlier. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the workspace partitioning. Okay, let me skip all that. And I'm going to stop there. Useful comments. These slides have gone by certain people, but all errors are mine. Okay, and if you want to look at Chomsky theories, I think the best paper to start off with is the Free Models of Description Language, published in 1956. A lot of it's still relevant today. And then maybe look at minimalist inquiries and problems of projection. But the new stuff is all more recent. Chomsky GK comes from 2021. There's a Miracle Creed paper, and there's a new paper which I'm not supposed to mention.
Okay.
All right. So that's known. Shortly before he had his stroke, chatting with me, and he always, I come into his garden, he always says, "Did you read about?" Okay, that's what he's doing right there. And I have lots more slides. I have 100 and something slides, but it took me time to get through 30 slides. But I do refer you to the abbreviations glossary. Although I only presented 30 something slides, I found I needed about 60 little definitions.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of material here, but I show you, if you go through the slides a little slower, you'll see why it has to be this way and not some other way. Thank you.
Will you make the slides available?
Yes, in fact, if you have the, I have the QR code at the start. That was hidden. That was part of it.
Yeah, okay, we take questions.
One question I have, you didn't explicitly mention the labeling algorithm.
Yeah.
It was implicit, but you didn't actually mention the
Yeah, I
labeling.
think that needs to be rethought.
You mean the whole algorithm?
Yeah. I mean, labeling is unreasonable.
Oh, okay.
I think,
Well, the
twenty
conceptual
twenty-three, he
system,
told me maybe it needs a bit of a rethink.
but the conceptual system has to know. Well,
Yeah, so interpretation can, as I said, interpretation can read the data configurations. We have to take that as given. Then what else is difficult to read? XPYP, right? XPYP is one of the core parts of the labeling algorithm. The way they did it before was we read phi, most prominent feature matching. Sorry if you're not a linguist. Phi, always we have to say, you know, one of them has to move. That's Andrea Morrow's story. Okay, but I think probably it has to be rethought.
Yeah, okay, other questions?
I get lots. Actually, just an empirical question first. So, you mentioned there's no like tucking in like Norman Richards does for like, you know, superiority obeying multiple WH. That's
Yeah,
out,
because-
and you know you have to obey minimal search. So how is now those sorts of cross serial things with superiority? Are those joining head movement as like not part of syntax anymore, or what's the story?
Head movement's not part of it. It's unformable. He wrote that in his paper.
Right. So I mean,
You gotta have another solution.
right. So I mean, but is there a solution for the cross serial orders we're talking about?
Yeah, in fact,
Superiority.
I think one of the last talks we had here, someone mentioned that that is a problem.
Yeah.
So there are other ways to deal with it. It has to be dealt with in externalization. I didn't have time to talk about the mechanism of externalization, but there's also a minimal theory of what externalization needs to look like. And I think they can be done in that, but that would be for another talk.
Yeah. I think we have Tom having a question on
From
Zoom.
the Zoom, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I tried to send this note that I was inspired to write while listening to Sandaway because I knew I wasn't going to understand it all anyway. And what he started on stimulated me to have some recollections of conversations with Noam, letters with Noam. And I tried to send it to everybody on the chat function, but I don't know that I succeeded. So I'll just mention it very briefly, but those of you who are interested in more detail, you can just write to me and ask if it doesn't appear in the chat. Around 1970, no, this is not a Shaggy dog story. Around 1970, I was very impressed by some of the ideas of Jerry Katz, Terry Langdon, Paul Postal, muttering about language as a natural object, as an uncaused, and in their view, platonic object, that kids have the endowment that makes it possible for them to discover language. So you don't have a learning problem, you just have a discovery problem, and so on. And I was intrigued by it because my own work was more about what we call externalization mechanisms today. And the question was, including problems of acquisition as well as processing. And so I got really interested in it. I was in New York too. We talked a lot personally about it. And it seemed kind of very attractive to try to explain the puzzle of why there were certain kinds of things without obvious biological shaping for them in languages. Where did they come from? But it began to make the acquisition problem look like just hash. I mean, for every universal uncaused form of a platonic sort, there had to have been some key waiting to unlock it, some key biologically endowed in the child to unlock that particular form. And that seemed like a mess, although it was kind of similar to Fodor's ideas about, as far as basic meanings go, they're all innate, just waiting to find something to attach themselves to. So it was a kind of idea that was around. But I was really puzzled. So I wrote to Noam, and I didn't ordinarily write to Noam. I think this may be the only time I wrote a scientific letter to Noam. And I expressed my confusion. I knew he wasn't very happy with Katz's view and an idea of platonic forms littering about in language. His argument, as everybody in this audience can figure out, his argument was that's just a list. It doesn't explain anything. And he wrote me back a really interesting, it's like a couple of sentences, which I'll paraphrase. He said, perhaps there is a natural law or a small set of natural laws that we don't know anything about in general that apply in particular when you have a bunch of tightly bunched together, a group of tightly bunched together interconnecting units that have some internal mechanism for communication, roughly the size of a grapefruit. This was his description of a brain. And these natural laws then apply in certain ways that naturally result in language as we know it, with respect to these funny properties that I was puzzling over. Well, more recently, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, probably 4 years ago at this point, he and I were discussing this, recalling it, and because he said, did you ever find that letter I wrote you? Because he was intrigued to see, it would have been in 1970 or 1971 that I had this correspondence with him. Well, I'd already looked and I couldn't find it, but what's going on now with the way in which the ideas about universals of the third kind, so-called, and I think in 1970 what he was saying was kind of an aspersion to that sort of idea, at any rate, that as a historical matter, if one cares about the history of science, and he cared when I reminded him before about this letter from him, it might turn out to be of some general interest. But the idea, he was thinking in a way, whether it was so clearly related to what Sandoway was talking about today or not, Noam had the idea then, maybe even in the background for the original three models for the description of language that Sandoway just referred to in the Transactions of some engineering journal. That was the sort of first real statement by Noam about the organization of everything that was under discussion. Okay, so I thought I'd mention that during a discussion period. I did write a short little essay trying to cram it into the chat, but I don't think I succeeded in mailing it to everybody. I did email it to a couple of you whose emails I know already, so you can look at it. But it's no big deal as far as that text is concerned. It's just more or less recounts what I just said. I am inspired to go back to some of the filing cabinets that have trailed around with me ever since I was actually at Rockefeller University in 1970, which is when this correspondence occurred. And we'll see if there's a carbon or something lurking with respect to that particular letter. But the point isn't so much, I mean, for those who are interested in the history of the field or history of ideas that go with it, might be of some value. But I think just for us who know Noam and have been, many of us in this group have been sort of following his ideas and then recasting them in our own ways and so on. And this could be of interest just because of how long this idea has been percolating.
Thank you, Tom.
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Other technical questions from the...
Do we have other questions on Zoom? No one. Here, David?
I didn't come here to torture you anyway, I promise. So I'm just curious, I didn't realize that Noam, I mean, I pick on it in my talk on Friday, but this tying the duality of semantics division to external, internal merge. I didn't realize that was so sort of an operative part of the theory. I mean, 2 questions about that. One, it seemed to make sense before where the story used to be the external merge was the basic case internal, and
it's the other way around.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so but then that seems sort of a weird choice to make the most basic thing to be the special meanings and like basic construction of meaning to be the more complicated case. You know what I mean? Whereas at least in the older view, it was sort of the other way.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, in the literature, he's got back and forth about, which one is preferred.
Yeah.
In terms of merge over move
Sure.
was the
Yeah.
big thing at the time. But he's been thinking deeply about that for several decades since then. And the idea is that, nature makes do what it has. So it's got, an operation. What is the simplest form of that operation? It's actually just to take one guy and look inside. So he's saying that's more basic than having to take two guys. If you think about it, he had an analogy a long time ago about a car bringing along an oil refinery with it versus just making a selection and then running with it. So that was about the time when minimalism came out. And he was saying, in the lexical array, you make a one-time selection for the lexicon, and then you merge all those atoms together and get a structure, okay? Rather than bringing along the lexicon every single time. So this is just you can view this as a development of that, okay? So now instead of saying, oh, I got to pick and choose my heads from the workspace, the simplest operation is actually just pick one guy and work inside that guy. So that's the motivation.
If I can have a follow, so like the more serious question that was about again, empirical, like there's this whole class of movements that, seem not to have any effect on meaning, right? These neutral word order variations within languages, across languages, the sort of thing that, again, what Cinque was looking at in the noun phrase, right? It just really puts a lot of pressure, let's say, on this claim that, like, if we expect internal merge is always discourse information structure, why are there meaningless movements? Why do they exist? What are they doing?
Yeah, so there is no extra movement. So I showed a slide from earlier on where people try Pearson 2000, where you have roll up, you have head versus head movement.
Yeah.
Some languages pick roll up, some languages pick head movement. And that was a pretty nice looking theory at the time, because you say the parametric differences, are you a direct language or are you the roll-up language, right? I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yeah, he's talking about Malagasy, if I recall, right?
Yeah, exactly. I just want to point out there's another way to do it, which I didn't have time to talk about. So.
Sure.
Where was it? Well, I said I wasn't going to talk about it. Yeah. So there are two kinds of languages, right? There's languages that look like this guy, where you move heads. And then there's a language that looks like this guy, where you start to roll up. But you notice there are lots of empty traces. There are lots of vacuous. So we define those as kind of vacuous movements, because they don't seem to make any difference from point of view of the semantics.
Yeah.
So in Cinque's terms, right, the adverbs have a certain hierarchical order, right? The left edge, that's supposed to be universal. And we had to move stuff over those things in order to get the right order. So object shift is about, if you have an adverb and you have an object, which side of the adverb does the object can appear on? And depends on what factors, okay? So some people say, if it's specific in some language, it has to appear on one side. If it's non-specific, maybe it doesn't appear, it's the other way around, whatever. There's some difference, okay? So those things have to be encoded a different way in the system. They're not part of our language at all. So what are they part of? They're part of the things we learn. So if you have a canonical, one way to view it, and this is not Chomsky's position, more close to my parsing kind of ideas. If we have a canonical way of expressing something, we learn that from the data, from statistics. And let's say suddenly we see something in a different place. So that signals something. The fact that something appears somewhere else as a signal. That thing can connect with pragmatic factors, can connect with it, but it's not part of the context-free semantic interpretation of the structure.
Tom has a point to make.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Hello. Someone
Tom, you raised your hand. Do you have a question or? We cannot hear you if you are.
And the
Well-
Bern movement stuff is amalgamation.
Okay, can you
hear me
now?
Is that,
Yes.
is that yet another operation on top of?
Okay.
forms?
Okay, so this is,
That's not part of that. That's part of the ancient system.
you'll see why I reserve this question till the point where people are ready to drink something. Sandaway, you mentioned as a kind of link, and more or less directly, that was an important step in your argument about the relationship between syntax and semantics. You slipped in the word, if you had a phrase, if you believe in dualism, then it's very simple. I think that's a fair paraphrase of what you said. Can you discourse a bit on exactly what you mean by dualism in this kind of case?
Talking about the duality of semantics part. Let me get to this.
Sorry?
I'll find it.
Um,
So you have two kinds of merge, two variants of a single operation, depending on which input you select. And I said that those two, oops, sorry. There we go. There was this slide. On the left side, we have internal merge. On the right side of external merge. And they're
Right.
both the same operation. It's just that the inputs are different. Okay, they compute exactly the same thing, which is to put two things together. It's binary, both of those cases. And so the problem is that you have a problem with copy and repetition. So in the old days, we had things called traces. So if you move something from one position, you fronted it. So imagine, I don't know, depends on your theory. Suppose you had the case where carefully the mechanic who fixed the car packed his tools. And he said carefully, it wasn't the first word to begin with, but it was somewhere else in the structure. And we moved that, we fronted carefully to the front of the sentence, leaving behind a trace of where it was before. Okay, that kind of system is no longer possible in the modern thing. I mean, when I was a grad student, traces were everywhere. We that's the thing I grew up on. We assumed they were basic, but that's all gone by the wayside, right? So if that's the case, then you only have copies, or basically occurrences. So you have carefully up here and carefully down there, if you have such a theory. And now you got to say, well, did I insert carefully twice, or did I just insert it once and move it? Okay, and that's what's being expressed schematically in the center of this diagram. So we can't tell. Well, in practice, we can. If we assume duality of semantics, and that just means that there's a division of labor. External merge we need anyway to build the theta configurations, okay? So they get to insert things. So we can tell, interpretation can tell which position is, we'll get a theta roll, okay? So that part is not. So when we have XXY, not in the abstract case, but in the real language case, interpretation will be able to read it. If it assumes that external merge built the theta configuration and internal merge did the other functions, like if you have a topic head and the topic head probes finds something to topicalize, you could make a copy in some version of the theory. Another version of theory, you actually don't make a copy, and that's for a later paper that he has, okay? But in that system, we can tell simply because merge knows theta theory. So his idea is that once you build theta theory into the system, that's a language organ specific condition imposed on merge. And once you impose that, everything works out. So you need duality of semantics. Now, some people have talked about it. There are people in the field who said maybe we can get rid of duality of semantics, and there's some technical argumentation along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Since we are over like 20 minutes, I think this is a very good point to stop and thank our speaker. Thank you. Stand away.
Ask the question about evolution and come to talk to me.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
have several hundred slides actually.
Yeah.
So there's an explanation for lots of things. And if you want me to explain the mechanisms, I can go through them step by step and we can see, here we have a computer program that works these things.
Yeah, and I thank everyone on Zoom who joined us. Thank you, and hope to see you all again in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you.